We've reached the final of the FTX Crypto Cup. Wesley faces Magnus Carlsen, and I'm going to show you two very exciting games from this first day in two separate videos. So here in this one, we're going to be looking at game one. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon. So here we go. Wesley with the white pieces. Of course, he's on very good form at the moment, has a good record in these online tournaments. Goes for bishop c4. Now, is it going to be a gioco piano? Well, no. Gioco piano would be d3 for white in this position. But instead, Wesley goes for this move, d4. I mean, this is an old continuation. But over the last couple of years, it's grown quite popular. I think basically it's a way for white of avoiding a lot of Spanish theory, basically. And this is a tricky position. Well, the knight should not move here, but what black has to do is counter in the middle with d5. Now, taking doesn't really get anywhere after pawn takes bishop, so the bishop moves on. The knight throws itself into the middle of the board, and material is once again balanced. Well, material might be balanced, but the position actually is very dynamic. It's very double-edged. I really like white's beautiful pawn on e5, supported by the pawn on d4. If white can at some point get this kingside majority going, get rid of that knight in the middle, then that would be wonderful. Good attacking chances. Black, on the other hand, can say, well, that knight on e4, really well supported, and that is just difficult for white to deal with. So those are the rough issues involved in this position. Bishop g4, and well, that's also a problem for white. You don't really want to bring the bishop back to break the pin. So here Wesley decides to play queen c2. h3 is actually the most popular move in this position, and we'll return to that in the next video I'm going to show you. But anyway, in this game, queen c2. Well, if bishop takes knight, then pawn takes, and that's going to be fun for white. There might even be a chance to open things up on the king side, and well, it's still an option to go queen side here. So instead of that, obviously this is now potentially a threat to win a pawn, so black comes back with bishop f5 and supports the knight. Not only that, it's a little bit problematic because obviously there's going to be a discovered attack. The knight could move, for example, here. So the queen has to move on again. Now in this position, knight a5 actually has a pretty good record for black, but Carlsen went with knight e7, which also looks very sensible. You can support the d-pawn like this. The knight can swing around in this direction. And this bishop on b5 is looking a little stranded over there. Castles. c6, and the bishop drops back to e2. And here, knight g6 has been played before. Carlsen went with rook b8. Now the point of that is that after knight a4, which was played, the bishop can now drop back to c7, and of course the b7 pawn is covered by the rook. So we still have this imbalance in the position. If white can get rid of that knight, then he can perhaps start to launch his kingside pawn majority, supporting that pawn on e5. Black, on the other hand, wants to try and stir up trouble while this wonderful knight is still embedded there in the middle of the board. So knight h4, the first step that Wesley makes into potentially driving away that knight. f6, okay, good idea. Carlsen preserved that bishop, and now he wants to try and open things up with f6, and that bishop points in this direction. I mean, normally with white I would want to exchange off knight for bishop. This didn't happen. But this brings this knight into a great position. This is very risky. For example, after this, then black can give up a piece and actually has a fantastic attack with this queen about to join in on h4. And of course, white's queen, well, miles away. The queen is in Siberia. So anyway, f6 has just been played. So Wesley has to take care here. Bishop f3. Well, wants to threaten that knight because of the pin here. And now it starts getting very, very tactical. b5. So hits this one, and then of course that will drag the queen away from this diagonal. So the knight goes back. And Carlsen takes off the knight. Of course, once again, because of this pin, then this knight is threatened. There's a lot of pressure here, so that knight had to be exchanged off. And instead of recapturing immediately, Wesley throws in pawn takes pawn. So he wants to avoid black taking here. And now I was really baffled by Carlsen's next move. He played the bishop into e4. I mean, he could just play rook takes pawn, and I think he has a pretty reasonable position here. Or another way to play is to play queen d6, threatening mate, and then queen takes f6. Play this position. I also think that's pretty reasonable for black. But bishop e4, yeah, I was surprised at that. He played it after just less than 2 minutes thought. It needs a lot of calculation. Here, Wesley just played pawn takes knight. If pawn takes here, well, because of the threat to the knight, actually white is not winning any material here. And yeah, this is actually very, very tricky. After queen takes, then you can start to have some fun like this, and this is a winning attack for black. After pawn takes, could play g3, but once again rook takes, and this looks great for black, you know, with these light squares. So this bishop has replaced the knight in the middle of the board. Anyway, let's go back and have a look at exactly what happened after bishop e4. Pawn takes knight, queen d6, threatening that mate here, this nice battery, g3, bishop takes bishop, and here Wesley went for bishop f4. He could kind of keep things a lot calmer just by playing this and throw that knight in the middle. I think this is about equal. You don't have to eliminate this knight. I mean, maybe knight here, but one can also take that. I mean, I like black's centre pawns here, but this bishop is a pretty good piece. There's maybe rook over. I mean, I think it's just balanced, basically. But in this position, Wesley went bishop f4, and things went a bit funny for white here. I sort of understand why Wesley did this. He wanted to plant this bishop on e5, and probably, you know, he just thought this, from a positional point of view, this looks pretty nice for white. But it's actually very, very tricky. First of all, you've got to deal with this bishop. There's a threat to play here, and queen takes pawn, after the rook moves, of course. So he eliminates this, plays queen b4. Well, it's not quite attacking the knight, but looking down this diagonal. And he's keen to attack this weak pawn on c6. He should bring the queen back and try and chase away black's queen. And that's... it's playable for white. I mean, I start to prefer black. But queen c5 is definitely a mistake. after this move, there are immediate tactical threats. I mean, it's quite possible that Wesley simply overlooked that in this position, if queen takes, knight e3 is a very annoying move. Of course, if the rook moves away, then queen takes... Oh, excuse me. There's mate in 1, queen g2, beg your pardon. And if pawn takes knight, then this is winning. The rook here should be winning for black. So this rook move here sets up this threat, and the queen is now just miles away. There's another example of a queen in Siberia. This is the thing, you know, in rapid play you often just have to use your judgment, and presumably he thought that Magnus would have to protect that pawn, but instead this move just sets up a deadly initiative for black on the king's side. Rook e1 covers e3, but now just h5, and once again the queen is miles away. You know, you need that queen to hop back somewhere here to drive away black's queen, but in this position this simple h-pawn attack is very powerful. There's no decent defense. If h4, then that can be taken, and after this, well, you crash through basically. So Wesley played h3, h4, once again threat here, and knight takes. It's quite nice. If pawn takes, then it's actually checkmate just in a couple of moves. Pretty straightforward. And the game went like this: bishop takes, pawn takes. Once again, pawn takes pawn. It's the same mating motif. Wesley tried rook here, and after g2 and takes, he resigned. The pawn threatens the rook. If the rook moves away, then queen takes pawn is mate in a couple. Yeah, what a crush. It all just went downhill. Let's just go back to that moment where Wesley made the fatal mistake. Queen c5 should bring the queen back. I mean, you can talk about inaccuracies earlier, but that was the fatal mistake that Wesley made. This was just game 1. Game 2 was drawn very quickly. And game 3 I'd like to show you in the next video. So do look out for that coming soon.